Hello, everyone. We're back for another Christmas episode. So this will probably come out about a week after the previous Christmas episode I recorded with Bulge, where we looked at Nightmare Before Christmas and what it means about conversion. Check out that. That was a fun episode. Seems to be getting some good reception. Joined by Fred in jolly old England. Hello, Fred.
Ciao.
Yes, Fred is back this time to talk about one of his, I would say, one of the best one of the best pieces of literature that your country has produced. I would say it's actually it's loved and it's beloved throughout the ages for a reason. Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, um, relatively short text, short story. I wouldn't even call it a novella. It's pretty short. And obviously with several different movie adaptations, my favorite, and really the best being The Muppets, obviously. That's my
Mm.
favorite.
The,
Uh,
the the cartoon Donald Duck one is quite good as well.
there's Scrooged as well, if you count that as one.
I think it's the origin of Scrooge McDuck
Yeah,
as a character. I think that was the first time, the fact that it was just a Disney version of Christmas Carol. I think that was the actual origin of Scrooge McDuck.
yeah.
For
As we've pointed out before on the show, and talked a lot about, or at least mentioned, the your country. I will now explain your culture to you. Your country is known for having spooky ghost stories during Christmas time, which makes sense. It's the darkest time of the year in the Northern Hemisphere, and so it's connected with death. And so it's around the solstice time, New Year, jumping from one year to the next. It's a liminal space. So why not have ghosts be very active during this time of year? Because we all know that ghosts don't like sunshine, and because ghosts are dead and night is like death, and so there's a lot of night. And then, like again, I said we're jumping from one year to the next, so we're crossing a boundary, we're crossing a threshold. So why not, ghosts who should stay supposedly be dead and stay dead are actually coming back and reminding us of things and freaking us out. And there's three of them, and they take us on journeys and teach us what it is to be a good person. Um, why not have ghosts be active during Christmas? I think it actually makes sense. And growing earlier, it never really made sense to me until I really started thinking about what the winter means, particularly for people who don't have electric lighting and, let's say, gas heating. Winter is a good time to die, and so yeah. And then obviously Christmas, celebration of the birth of Christ, light breaking into darkness. So there's kind of interesting liminal things happening. Um, Obviously Dickens plays into this, and Dickens popular, I mean, helps reinvigorate the sort of the British Christmas ghost story, is my understanding. This is an older tradition. Obviously, you get stories like Hamlet, which is kind of a Christmas ghost story. It's not maybe not overtly, but it takes place in and around Christmas. And there's obviously Hamlet's father is haunting things, and it's very spooky in that story. But even that's standing on the shoulders of something else. So it seems to just be kind of like an older English tradition of like darkest time of year ghost stories.
It's
Um,
almost like Christmas Carol is the Disney adaptation of Hamlet.
Well, and
But
Dickens explicitly calls out Hamlet in the story, which I had forgotten. I was like, oh, that's right. He says, like, as Hamlet, there's a bit about Hamlet's father's ghost. And I was like, oh, okay. So Dickens is like quite obviously doing a hat tip here to the bard, which is cool. Yeah, it is. It's like the Disneyized version, maybe a little bit, where there's more of a moral. It's less of a ambiguous about what the ghosts want, right? It's like what does the ghost of Hamlet's father really want? It's sort of lots of people have written about this. Derrida has written about this, hauntology and all these things. Whereas Dickens is like, no, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell you what the ghosts really want. What the ghosts are there is to warn you, um, admonish you to be not such a degenerate and to be a better
well,
person.
it's it is a very simple story, and I think it is true that it was written because Dickens needed the money or
He
something. It
needed
was
the money.
it
Yeah.
was something sort of thrown together, and it's obviously less complex than Dickens' other more expansive works like Bleak House or Oliver Twist
Yeah.
or something, and it is more simple. But I think that often means people can belittle its merits and belittle. the messaging in it and how important it is. But I suppose that's generally for how people like to belittle genre films compared to films that are more grand and more acclaimed.
Well, and you know me, because
So,
you've known me for a while. I'm a big proponent of genre literature or genre films as being worthy
yeah, exactly.
of remembering and worthy of analysis. Because, yeah, when people throw that term, oh, it's just a genre this, I'm not saying you're doing
Yeah,
that. Genre this, genre that. I'm like, you're just dismissing
yeah,
it outright and not even looking into, like, does it have merit or not? You know?
yeah.
So, um,
It's like I was so today I have been re-listening to I've been listening I my history with the stories I did it in school in primary school, and I've seen various TV adaptations, and to refresh myself just today I was listening to the audiobook on Spotify by Martin Jarvis, who
Martin
is
Jarvis, yes.
I've told you about before, is a
You're a fan.
fantastic voice actor, and he is also an actor.
I, if I may,
Yes.
I like Martin Jarvis. I am also I've now started the tradition of if anyone, at least in the US, if you have an Audible subscription, you kind of just get it included with Audible.
Yeah.
There's a Tim Curry version, and
Mhm.
that's my jam. But I like Martin Jarvis as well. They're both good.
I've not heard the Tim Curry one.
It's
The
great.
Martin Jarvis one is just when I was growing up, I was listening to a lot of Martin Jarvis
Yeah.
doing children's stories. And so I just have a very strong personal affinity for Martin Jarvis, and especially in Christmas Carol. And it was on Spotify before Spotify started doing audiobooks. It was just like an album, this version that I've been listening to. Anyway, um, so I was listening to it today, and I was just thinking, if this was a film as opposed to a novel, if this was a film and it came out today, it would be seen as a sort of multi-genre, interesting artistic film sort of thing. Uh, and sometimes those ones are more dismissed by, I don't know, the Academy or something, or sometimes they just have a cult following. But there is an interesting mix of genres. But I guess that might lend itself to how this was being done in a hurry because he needed the money. It was more simple, it was quicker. So he's just sort of throwing stuff in there and doing like a greatest hits of my talent as a writer. Um, but even in circumstances like that, you can make great things,
Hmm.
and it is just it is very great. And like
Necessity is the mother of
so
invention, as they say.
it's so funny, it's so comedic. I don't know whether it was just because I was listening to Martin Jarvis and he's such a great reader, but the opening bits where Scrooge is being so heartless about the poor, and he's being so horrible. It's funny. I can't help but think it's supposed to be funny, you know. So there's obviously humor as well as fantasy and maybe some horror as well.
No, there's some different horror elements in there.
It is a sort of like um you know Swiss Army knife of Charles Dickens's literary talents, I suppose, all sort of in one place.
I
But
mean, there's that. What springs to mind too, in terms of, I mean, horror as a standalone genre hadn't. I mean, obviously, there's been horrific storytelling has been with humans as long as there's been humans, but horror
yeah,
in the modern sense, kind of. There was the Gothic at this point, but it wasn't like broken off into its own constituent, horror kind of thing.
no, of course
Um,
not.
yeah, it was a little bit more wrapped up into other genres. But like the bit that springs to my mind, at least upon this rereading, since I do try to reread this or re-listen to it rather, each
Mm.
year now it's a sort of this is my second year of the tradition, so it's a new tradition, but I think it's a good tradition. I'm going to stick with it. Um, is like the bit where there's what is it? It's Marley's ghost is talking about how like there's a spirit next to him or near him who like desperately wants to give a poor widow or something like that money from his coffers but can't. So like the fact that you're cursed to like wander the earth wanting to do good, but you literally can't do good, that is kind of a terrifying idea, right? Like that's a terrifying idea.
Marley's story is the horror because obviously the whole story is not a horror because, well, it has a resolution, it has a happy ending, and horror traditionally just does not have a resolution. That's sort of the one of the defining characteristics of horror most of the time. But Marley's story alone is a horror story. That's definitely true, and it is interesting how central Marley is to the premise of the whole story. I mean, the whole thing starts with is it old Marley is dead, or is it just Marley is
Yeah,
dead? Old Marley is dead.
I can scroll down and see here. Marley was dead to begin with. There you go. Yeah,
The first sentence
yeah.
is old Marley is dead. Or is it
It says
Marley?
Marley was dead,
Marley
colon, to begin with, period.
Marley was dead to begin with. Yes, and it is so interesting how, despite Scrooge being this this very cartoonish villain. I mean, this is how I it's so easy how this was adapted for a Muppet movie or a Disney
Yes.
adaptation, is that it is so cartoonish,
Well,
especially
everything goes to 11 on
it's
this.
cartoon. I mean, not that that's a bad thing. It
No,
just is.
it's yeah.
And but then the thing that immediately causes Scrooge to just be it be a different way is well his interaction with Marley, but also just the kind of centrality of Marley even in death, even before he met Marley's ghost. There's that description of his fireplace in his house, which has lots of carvings on it, which are depicting stories from the Bible.
Yeah.
And then, but then it says, but this portrait of Marley on the mantelpiece was all that took Scrooge's attention. You know, so
Yeah, here it is. I got it.
it's,
And yet that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came like the ancient prophet's rod and swallowed up the whole. Yeah.
so it's interesting. Obviously, even before you see Marley's ghost and you see Scrooge interacting with him, you get this understanding of how important he was, and it is interesting. It is that is the mystery of what their relationship is, despite everything else in this story being very direct. It's probably very direct about what it means and what this, that, and the other means, and it's like, tell me Tiny Tim will live, and the ghost basically or implies if you don't do good, he'll die. Just telling him straight up, leaving no mystery at all. But this is the one thing that is quite mysterious as to what was their relationship really like in life, because that's obviously not depicted at all. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, so there, I mean, obviously there's a fair amount of horror. And it does not doesn't stay horror, but I mean, the whole thing is a ghost story. And since this episode will come out, and I know, sorry, Fred, you probably haven't seen the one I just recorded yesterday, but looking at Nightmare Before Christmas and like the spooky qualities of Christmas, that there is actually a spookiness to Christmas, and that people throughout the ages have particularly in the Northern European Christmas traditions have kind of understood this, that there's monsters that come out or ghosts that come out during Christmas. In the folklore, particularly, you get things like Krampus in Bavaria and Austria, sort of like Christmas demons. You get Zwarte Piet in the Netherlands, a sort of black man helper, but like to Saint Nicholas, it's kind of a weird guy running around. Um, you get like in the Rhineland in Germany, you get Knecht Ruprecht, who's basically Zwarte Piet. You get in England you have ghosts aplenty. In Scandinavia, you have various little supernatural creatures running around. I just did a thing on Scarlet Thread Society looking at the Icelandic Yule cat. And so yeah, it's there's something inherently spooky about Christmas. And yeah, I mean there are overt or horror elements I think that Dickens is using here, particularly with Marley. Although, in his little preface, Dickens does say about the story, may it haunt basically, may it haunt people's houses pleasantly. So he's looking to write something pleasantly haunting, which is kind of a fun. We don't tend to think of haunting as like a pleasant experience, usually, if you've ever been haunted. And maybe you have, maybe somebody watching this has,
I
but
mean, even in the Christian nativity story, you have the backdrop to it of Herod killing thousands of little boys. So,
yeah,
even even past the pagan Christmas traditions, it doesn't, become sugary sanitized by
yeah,
Christian.
right.
It's a full range of implications, especially, yes.
So yeah, So I mean, there's a couple different ways we could take this. I mean, I think most this at this point, if you don't know the story, it's what's stopping you. Just it's like read it, listen to it. It's not very long, or watch the Muppets version. And in some ways, the Muppets version is actually more honest, more loyal to the original story, which is hilarious and cool, despite it being full of puppets.
It is very loyal. The dialogue is actually very
The
good.
dialogue is drawn heavily from the original. Yeah, yeah,
And it well, and the fact that the Muppet version of it was made is just a testament to how cartoonish the original thing is, and
yes,
that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's obviously maybe got a different or main audience than some other Dickens work, but it's just a testament to what sort of work it is. But that still doesn't take away from its overall merit. Yeah.
yeah. Agreed. But I think so people I think at this point just probably look in like read the story. I think a more maybe fruitful use of our time today would be to sort of look at, or at least this is what's most interesting to me, and I think you're up for the ride, is to look at like the kind of well, really charity that Dickens espouses in the story, and maybe compare and definitely contrast that with kind of modern, progressive, and I mean, to really take it to its root, Marxist kind of notions of quote unquote charity. Although I don't even want to use the word charity for it
No,
because they espouse is not charity in the Christian sense. It is something else entirely. So
no. I
yeah,
mean, Marxism is just a whole is a completely or the idea of Marxism and the idea of welfare is just there's nothing conventional about it. It's just a completely unique thing that is that is so often conflated with charity or conflated with general goodwill. But it's a literally an existential revolution of your
yeah.
an entire worldview. It's something completely different entirely. And
Well, and it's a and
yeah,
it's been, I mean, this is not this is not precious or unique to point out, has so clearly, at least in the West, has so clearly invaded Christianity to the point where Christians unknowingly will start talking about charity in a way that is distinctly Marxist. Upon this rereading of, since I knew that this was the angle I wanted to take it, upon this rereading of A Christmas Carol, I was struck by, I mean, okay, so 1840s, you're starting to get kind of into that, beginnings of this kind of a what we now think of as a modern leftist kind of, and obviously it's, there's the French Revolution beforehand and things like that. Um, but it still struck me as this is a relatively unpaused view of Christian charity. That this is a kind of view of Christian charity that is compels, if you take this the moral of the story to heart, really does compel you to be a more charitable person, um but at the same time it does not couch it in this bizarre class war, race war, gender war, however you want to call that, like context. It's literally like, look at the people around you who are suffering. Could you help them? You should help them. I mean, it was so refreshing. It's so refreshingly simple because it's kind of just strikes you as the correct way to do it, as opposed to like the reason why Marley is enchained is because he wasn't charitable. It's not because of like internal power dynamics or like any of this shit. It's like he should have had more love for his fellow man, and that's it.
he was just selfish, or rather, he was just concerned with himself. And people can be that way whilst they interact with other people a lot. But people think that charity has to be such an established thing where you are doing a thing that's so officially designated a charitable thing, whereas you can easily be charitable just by doing good for others without the expectation of a reward.
Exactly.
And if you multiply, you can multiply up small acts like that to have just as good effect, if not better, than if you have a massive officially designated charitable organization doing X, Y, Z. And Dickens does highlight the differences between there being such officially designated charity with the portly gentleman
Yeah.
characters. And I
He
think,
doesn't denigrate. He doesn't I mean, Dickens doesn't denigrate that, but I think he makes he goes farther. He's like, charity isn't just people who call themselves charity. Charity is actually a virtue that you can cultivate and you should cultivate, right?
Well, the specifically in the you get an idea of the themes of charity with the opening bits with Scrooge and the people that are coming in to talk to him with his nephew, and then you have the portly gentleman, and uh, the thing about Scrooge is that he is not he can't be a completely bad character because otherwise there would be no worth in redeeming him at the end.
Right.
Hence, it's not possible for him to have no valid points in the early stages of the story where he is so cynical. Obviously, he says most of the things he's saying are bad things, but the interactions with the portly gentlemen is most interesting. Firstly, why do they have to be portly? Why do they have to be described as portly? There's I think it's because Dickens wants to highlight some sort of irony between them being well fed men who are concerned with the destitute and the poor, and that maybe sometimes there's a great tendency for people in charity for there to be a bit too much irony in the way people do charity in that way, especially in Victorian times. And this also lends itself to another Dickens story. There's a character called Mrs. Jellyby, who is a woman who is very passionate about Africa and suffering and poverty in Africa. And she spends all her time doing charitable organization and things for the benefit of people in Africa. But meanwhile, her family life is a complete disaster. Her husband is basically suicidal, and her children are all neglected. And her eldest daughter, who is basically her I don't know, secretary or something, is very much mistreated, and she hates her mother, and she hates the very mention of the word Africa, and it's so extremely insightful as to the sort of international charitable minds that people have today. And this was in whenever Bleak House was written in the mid 19th century. And so Dickens is very easy to criticize different ways of charity that are wrong. And I think the portly gentleman is just a basic idea of the irony of how some people can be charitable whilst being quite well to do themselves, and maybe being less concerned than they ought to be, or less kind of sincere. And
Yeah, that's true. I don't know if I got a distinct. I guess I don't know if I inherently read the Portly Gentleman. I'm not saying there's not a hint of irony there. I don't. I still feel like the Portly Gentleman was. They still feel like they do good things, though.
yes,
Right? Like in the story, in A Christmas Carol, I feel like they still do. I mean, maybe not enough, but who of
he's
us
not.
does?
But then you then also have Scrooge saying to them, "Are there no prisons? The poor laws are in place." Because from what you're describing me, asking me for money, it's as if I was under the impression they were not there anymore. As in these things he's probably being taxed for.
Right.
So, so I think that bit is where you give a slight benefit of the doubt to Scrooge's point, and to the irony that there sometimes is with some people who are charitable, but maybe are just a bit short-sized in their sincerity.
Well,
But obviously, Scrooge is being very callous, and I think you're
yeah.
supposed to as well.
Well,
But yeah,
and
as
I
I said, Scrooge can't be a completely bad character if he then is redeemed. You
right.
know,
I
yeah,
couldn't help but read because I live in a city experiencing an extreme amount of, you could say, poverty, because I think it presents as poverty, but a severe problem with substance abuse, like so with drug issues. I think I mean all cities have this problem, but it's extraordinarily bad up here in the Pacific Northwest. It's very bad. I
yeah,
I couldn't help but read. Now, that's not the exact kind of poverty that Dickens is describing, but there are some broad overlaps with it.
sure,
Um, Particularly, I mean, nowadays with like things like cost of living crisis, which is a crisis, people not being able to afford things that I would argue, should, at least in the American context, be relatively basic, and then falling down the bad pitfalls of things like drugs and alcohol, and then winding up on the street and really having nowhere to go because I mean, and not to remove responsibility for actions, but there is getting stuck in a really bad situation where you kind of can't get out many times because of all of that was sort of the context with which I was reading this story, particularly also this time around. And I mean, to bring in your bit about or your good points about the portly gentleman. Um, and maybe the ironic ways that society or parts of society maybe they attempt to help, but they do so in a misguided fashion or in a not sincere enough fashion or something like that. I mean, I can think about my city, which is Seattle. The city of Seattle, we spend a ton of money, taxpayer money, on homelessness initiatives and services and stuff like that. It's not like we're not spending money on things. Yet it's so, I mean, I can tell you just from like watching it play out between people living, people, homeless people, people who are addicts on the street, interacting with city workers and city people trying to help them. I mean, like there's such a disconnect between like what the services like the money that's going to services, the services that are being offered, and then what people and I'm not going to say I'm an expert, but what people actually need. That it is kind of hilarious. I mean, there's like, I mean, not to make this all about Seattle because it's not just about that, but I mean, and I don't know the situation in England right now because I don't live there, but like you know, there's never like in the Seattle context, we spend a lot of money, and if you ever question why we're spending so much money, it's claimed that I mean, people might even call you a Scrooge there this time of year, like, oh, you just don't want to help poor people, you just don't care about the destitute, you just don't care. And it's like, and then so then well, how do we care? We care by throwing money at the problem. It's like, well, okay, maybe that's the portly gentleman, right? The modern Seattle equivalent. Just
Yeah.
throw money at it. It's like, yeah, but that's not going to solve if somebody's addicted to heroin or fentanyl or something like that or meth, that throwing money is not going to solve the problem. That's not that money doesn't help them, you know. It doesn't get them clean. Now you can fund a program that gets them clean, but if you like the biggest issue for us is there's just never in our city at least is there's no requirement for people to it's effectively decriminalized. Everything's decriminalized, so nobody ever is required to get better. They just let people, as a city, Seattle has let people just die on the street from overdoses. It's not uncommon here.
Oh,
Um,
You can't have you can't just have help, quote
yeah,
unquote, completely unconditional. I mean, you can certainly do trial and error. Like you can certainly do some initial things where you give people some money who are in certain circumstances and see what happens after that. But you don't just have no kind of scrutiny for negative unintended negative consequences. And it's a business model.
yeah.
You know,
Well, it's the home. Well,
if
they call it the homelessness industrial complex up
they're
here. Is what it's called.
not going to do things that solve the problem, otherwise the people that do them or the people that are employed by
Their
the government
jobs are gone. Yeah,
are going to have a business. So
yeah,
yes, obviously there must be some innate design.
yeah.
And I think the overall point Dickens is trying to make is that what the right thing to do, as in to actually do, as opposed to the way you feel about being charitable, the right thing to do in a given place and time is not so simple.
No.
As in, certainly you can try something, but you should be wary about unintended consequences, and you should be able to adapt to them.
Well,
You
even
can't, yeah, I think,
when
and I
Scrooge, yeah, good.
so there are many different examples presented of how you be a charitable person in the story, and they all have their pros and cons. So it's a question of actions being not quite so simple compared to intention for good for that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because at the end when Scrooge makes the turn towards the good, um, which is a kind of repentance. I mean, that's literally what repentance kind of is. Turning towards the good. It's interesting that he doesn't just. I mean, he is quite charitable. He's recognizes he needs to make up for lost opportunities that he didn't do. He does say that he's going to make a contribution to several of the to translate it into a modern, at least American term, homelessness initiatives in the city. Even though that term is triggering for me, but it's kind of like the charitable causes, let's say, is probably the better term. Um, but he's not just throwing money at the problem, right? He's not just Bezosing his way out of the issue, be like, oh, I donate to a lot of things. It's okay because I just donate. He actually comes alongside, um, was it the Cratchits, right? Yeah, comes alongside the Cratchits, comes alongside a family who is in his immediate, well, it's in his employ, in his immediate vicinity, who is in dire need of help, and does it through relationships. An established relationship strengthens an established relationship and does it that way, which is a very more, I mean, again, this term is going to be overused, but organic. It's like it's from the bottom up. It's not this top-down managerial kind of we're going to solve the problem. It's more of a recognition that you're going to have poor people. There's going to be problems in life because life is not perfect, and some people will have more than others. Those people, it's kind of that whole noblesse oblige thing, right? Like if you are noble in the sense of, at least in this case, of moneyed or have something more, you should probably try to figure out a way to help people who have less, which is not the same thing as really kind of a more Marxist, like I said, managerial mindset of viewing it as sort of like an economic calculation problem that can be solved if you just redistribute enough stuff. As if you could ever do that, as you said, it's to fix actually fixing problems, particularly social problems like poverty, like drug addiction, is it's a very complex thing because it's not just a money issue. It's not just an inequality issue. It has elements perhaps of the situations into which people are born, but it also has a lot to do with things like unexpected shit that happens in life, and then also people's decisions. It's a super complex problem, and I don't know if there's. So I guess I'm trying to say is I don't know if Dickens shows us the solution. I think he just shows us a way of working towards the good with your fellow man, which
Yeah,
is sort of a more. It's more grounded. It's definitely it's explicitly Christian, um, and it is not he views poverty as sort of a situation of a problem of humanity. Um, and I would say, I'm reading between the lines here, but I think it's there in the story. It's a problem of the fallen state of the world, and it's a problem that we as fallen creatures can't completely fix, but we can remediate parts of it. We can help some people. We can make something better. And that ultimately doing it in a more humble, really more, like I said, from the ground up. And I would argue that that's a distinctly Anglo way of viewing charity, which I like, by the way. I think it's a good way of viewing charity.
oh,
It's realistically hopeful, but it's not trying to solve the problem because, like, Scrooge he can't save London. He can't save everyone, but he could maybe help the Cratchits. He could maybe help the people around him or who intersect with him in some way in their lives. And even if it's even too, what I like too is that when Scrooge makes the turn towards the good, it's not just money. The money is part of it, but it's like a general spreading of cheer, which could be and is using money to buy turkeys. Paying the boy on the street, I forget how much he pays him if he runs and gets the turkey as quickly as possible, right? Like it's not just money. It's a kind of a general spreading of joy, via charity that is really what like the turn that Scrooge needs to make and then does make. The money, the financial decisions comes later as a consequence of that, but it is not the thing that turns him towards the good. And I mean, it's not hard to say that one of the biggest problems with Marxism is that it focuses only on the economics or the material side of things and has it tells itself that it has no spiritual underlying. Of course, it does, but it deludes itself into thinking that it can be untethered. It can be untethered to anything, that has come before it, and is untethered to things like culture, and is untethered to things like history. Right? It's a reset. You literally, whereas Dickens is saying you can't reset any of this shit. Like all the evil that Scrooge did in his life is not reset. It still exists as consequence, but that doesn't mean that Scrooge is like unredeemable, right? Scrooge helps to works towards redeeming what his past has been. Okay, so you have been maybe less, you've been definitely less than charitable. You have a lot of money. Okay, but what can you do now to make things better? It doesn't seek sort of equalization or retribution so much as restoration. That's an inherently Christian world. That only exists in Christianity. This kind, it's not about, it's not tit for tatting. It's restoring and making whole. Um, and so anyhow, that's my spiel about that. This is why I do think, because again, there's no solution to the world's problems outside of Christ, but there are ways of working, of sort of participating maybe in that broader solution. I think, Scrooge does that at the end with probably the knowledge, because he's become hopefully a little wiser after his supernatural journey, that he's still not like Scrooge will still die. Tiny Tim will still die. Tiny Tim will not die, hopefully, in destitute poverty as a sickly child, though, right? Maybe Tiny Tim gets to have a life of his own, a family of his own, do good of his own, and help other people. But like, it's none of these are the end. I mean, I hate you. You don't want to say end solution because of its connotations in history, but it's not real. And none of it are the ends. So there's no, right. It's not about solving the problem. Um, and
the end.
Marxism seeks a solution that is not that cannot be attained to these problems, and in so doing, is just horrific and murderous and the most Scrooge-like you could possibly be, right? Because Scrooge once, before his sort of his turn, Scrooge, talks about what is it? Are there not the bit you sorry talked about? Are there not workhouses? Are there not prisons? Like, or that bit too about how about they just die? Basically, how about they just die now and reduce the excess population? When I heard that too, I mean, particularly post COVID, you're like, holy shit. I mean, I heard people say that like during COVID about like, well, it's all right if, this X number of people can, it's okay if the lockdowns do all these horrible things because at least we won't have to deal with COVID anymore. Which is, I mean, I heard people talk about basically gleefully championing the sacrifice of people's livelihoods, which really did affect people's lives and did result in and is currently resulting in, death. I, I, I don't know. I think reading Scrooge post COVID too is also fascinating. Like his character, you're like, wow, you know that Scrooge would have just barricaded himself in his house and would have just gleefully let everyone die around him as long as he was still able to make money. That's all that he would care about, right?
Well, it's a divergence from our nature to be so solitary, and you just simply not being solitary can be very charitable because you can just interact with people and do very small simple things that
Well,
are without the expectation of reward.
what is
So
the number one? So what is, I mean, this is something that I harp on autistically, so I'm going to do it now. And I'm certain you've heard me say something like this before, but it bears repeating. Like, what is that? Like, so you can, if you think about tithes and offerings in a Christian sense, right? You're
mm,
giving up something. You're giving up something to something else, to someone else, or to something bigger than you, or whatever it is. It's easy to think of that as money, particularly in like a modern, um,
yeah,
you
well,
know,
no, everything because obviously everything
mon-
can be liquidated and
yeah,
redistributed.
liquidated. We think of it. We live in an overly monetized society in the sense of our brains are think everything about in terms of like dollars, cents,
Yeah,
pounds. It's like euros. Everything is like money as this like weird broad like what is money really? I mean, everyone's still trying to figure out what money is, as
because
opposed to so
then,
we
then
we
it
think of we think of giving up money to something or donating money to someone, which is good if you're doing it in the right spirit. I mean, you can also give money to people in kind of the wrong spirit. That can happen too, right? You can
yeah,
give money to help someone, but maybe there's like crazy strings attached in a way where it makes them sort of indebted to you. You can do that. I mean, that's not good. That's not
yeah,
virtuous. You can also give up money with kind of a brittle spirit and not like a joyful spirit. You're like, okay, but are you really getting the sense of what the giving is? Like, the money is important to be given to people who need it if you're to truly be charitable, but it has to be more than just the money because again then you'll fall back into that weird Marxist trap of it's all about just the money and it's an economic calculation problem that must be solved. No, it's about changing the way you're viewing what you have. And money is kind of fake, although it's also kind of real, but ultimately like the one currency we have is time. We don't know how much time we have because you do not know what the future holds. So really what my point is saying is like you're talking about just spending time with someone that if you do, I really, this is something I've been reading more Girard lately and it's just really come through. It's like the
Sure.
absolute necessity of sacrifice and the absolute necessity of sacrificing the best thing. So think about Jordan Peterson here, Cain and Abel. You gotta have the good, the best sacrifice. But what is maybe the best? What is maybe in a modern context? What is maybe one of the real best sacrifice we can give to people is probably our time, right? In the end, it's probably our time, and it's the one thing we'll never get more of, and we don't know how much we have of it. We can't calculate the time we have. So when you give it up, it is a real letting go of something. And that could really be spending time with friends, whether in person or on Zoom, such as we're doing now, or whatever it is. Obviously in person is always better, but sometimes you can't. Obviously, I mean, I don't know if I can swing a last minute trip to jolly old England. I'd like to, but it's kind of expensive, uh, and it's short notice. But spending time with people and not just like time begrudging, like, yeah, I'll be with you, but like spending quality time and giving something of yourself, being somewhat vulnerable to people and letting them be somewhat vulnerable with you and building trust and all these things. I mean, to me, that really is like the core of charity is a willingness to freely give away without the expectation of receiving back, but oftentimes you do receive it back in a way that you didn't really intend, in a way that you didn't expect. You receive something back, even if it's just a thank you or something like that, like a heartfelt thank you. That always, you don't do good to be thanked, but if you've ever been thanked for doing something, sometimes there's been times in my life where I've been thanked for doing something and I didn't realize I had ever really done a thing. I guess I just sort of naturally was just like, oh, I'll just do this thing. And somebody thanked me. Like that really helped me. And I was like, what did I even do? And they're like, when you did this thing, I was like, oh, I didn't realize that was so helpful for you. Yeah, you're welcome. Because it was so and I wasn't even thinking of going to receive anything back for that because it was just sort of a normal thing I do. Those compliments always make me feel the best. Not that it's about my feelings first and foremost, but because it was so unexpected to ever receive, that was not what I intended. I'm glad I helped someone. I didn't, I was just sort of being me. I don't know if you've had instances like that. Feel like somehow the most rewarding because it's like it wasn't even really me doing it. I didn't do it I didn't seek to gain anything from that. Because there's other times too where I fall into the Jerry Seinfeld problem. Do you know the episode of Seinfeld where he tries to help Babu with the Pakistani restaurant? Do you know this one?
Not seen much Seinfeld.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we should actually do a whole episode just on this, but there's one of my favorite episode of Seinfeld is the one where Jerry in trying to do a good thing but for selfish reasons to feel good and to look good in front of other people absolutely ruins a man's life. And there's these moments throughout the episode where Jerry's just sitting back and nodding, and there's like a voiceover of his own thoughts, and he says, "I am a good person. I'm a good person. I'm helping." And it's just it so wonderfully captures like the shallowness of sort of modern quote unquote charity culture for lack of or whatever you want to call that. This like I help starving kids in Africa, but somebody's like bleeding, somebody's OD'd in front of my apartment. I'm not going to help them. I'm not going to call the cops. That's just, I'm helping kids in Africa. And you step over people who are in front of you, dying, suffering, and you go help kids in Africa. You're like, right, but there's somebody right in front of you who maybe needs the help. No, because I'm already helping kids in Africa. It's this mindset of like,
Often,
I don't want to inconvenience myself because it's a lot easier for me to send a monthly donation than it is for me to give of my time to help someone, right? This is my point. Like,
the help in Africa is often very misplaced.
oh
Not
yeah.
all, I can think of several examples. So recently, or a couple of years ago, I started reading a book which I need to finish. It's called Indigenous African Institutions. So it's basically like a massive book about African culture and about modern Africa, and by this Ghanaian person called George Ayati. I can't remember how to pronounce his name. And he was talking about recent times when the West has tried to be charitable to Africa. Things like how some Norwegian companies sent some sort of frozen fish processing factory to Sudan, even though they don't have frozen fish there. They don't have
Yeah.
fish. Whether there's another one where they sent like a milk bottling factory to Ethiopia, but it doesn't make sense because the native culture often means that people drink milk straight from the teat. You
Yeah.
know, this stuff
They're
that
real
probably
raw milk types down there. They're big on the raw milk.
oh yeah, they no yeah, you get these vegans and vegetarians who go to Africa and they're horrified with how much they eat meat and all that, you know.
Oh yeah.
And but then you also have I can think of examples of people I know who've done good things in Africa. For example, a woman I know who has a company that does uh, that helps coffee producers in Uganda, and she's actually gone there, and she's actually interacted with the people, and she's actually seen what's wrong, what which knowledge, the specific intimate knowledge I have of how things work. How can I give solutions that are tailored to that, as well as helping these actual coffee producers? You actually have to do the work if you want to help Africa. Like you have to know Africa, and Africa is an enigma to a lot of people in the
Yeah.
West. And
Well,
my brother and sister have been a lot and done, charitable stuff, and you describe stuff that you really can't just you can't really know the full extent of until you've really been there. So you
I
have to
mean,
know really
you
help
have
you.
to know a place. You have to, yeah, you have to be
And,
grounded in a place and to really help that place. You can't
and
just throw things at a foreign culture and unexpect it to work like it does for you. That's not how humans are. It's not how cultures work.
and it's also true of that other Dickens character, Miss Jellyby, I mentioned before. So it's so easy for charity to be misplaced when it's completely unconstrained. And I think just so you've been talking about Marxism a bit, I think Marxism is in this whole other category from misplaced charity, in that it seeks to see all social problems, social ills as a result of capitalism. Therefore, to engage in charity is to actually be sympathetic to capitalism, because you are making
Right.
peace with the oppression, making peace with the bad system. Like you can even concede that people can have increased welfare through capitalism, which Marx routinely did. He routinely said people's incomes have the working class incomes have gone up in the 19th century by X amount of percentage. He's routinely said that in his writings. So it isn't even a
I've heard some people who are far smarter than me call that into question about it that it was a like a weird it took a like yes that happened but it didn't happen right away, that there was a severe impoverishment that happened before the standard of living, or at least before wages increased. But so I don't
yeah.
know. I'm not yeah, I've heard some people have called that into like Marx some of that into question, I think, like the way that
Well,
how
the
that
the,
actually happened.
the 19th century was not the um I mean the kind of initial times of the Industrial Revolution preceded the sort of center of the 19th century. So the Industrial Revolution had started a long time
Yeah.
before Marx was writing. So he was writing in kind of later years when things were a little more kind of streamlined, and it would have been around that time that the fruits of the works would really be becoming reality. And and like even like I myself have looked up data about average incomes and you know average prices of certain goods, and comparing the 19th century to 20th, and it's true, wages were consistently increasing in the 19th century, and there was essentially no such thing as inflation,
Yeah.
as if there was no long-term inflation. There was no long-term
Well, it's
trend.
harder to manipulate the money supply.
But
It's one of yeah.
well, I mean, well, it was possible to manipulate the money supply. The
No,
Bank
but
of
it was harder. It wasn't computerized.
you could manipulate the money supply when you needed to spend, when you needed wartime spending, and that was in the case in America in the Civil
Well,
War.
but then that's bonds, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
whatever.
which is different than they do. We don't even do, but we don't have the good grace to pretend to do bonds anymore. We don't even bother to do bonds anymore. Yeah.
Any kind of government spending where they just forcefully uh you know devalue the currency. It happened
Yeah.
in the what happened in the Napoleon Wars, but the wartime spending the effects of the wartime spending then dissipated and returned to the state they were beforehand, and that just wasn't the case in the for the world wars. So there's essentially no long-term trend inflation, and there are increasing um incomes. But the Marxist worldview can concede that, is it concedes those points, but then, so the problem isn't just a question of, oh, there's there's poverty, that's bad. It's a revolution of literally everything. It's a
Yeah.
complete. It's it's not even about a response to seeing well, it was obviously because Engels wrote his book about the conditions of the working class in England, and Marx was, and then from then they sort of thought, let's completely revolutionize the whole society from the very ground up. And I mean, Marx was a horrible, you know, malicious, demonic person, and
Yes.
absolute
Well, he's one of Hegel's disciples, so
absolute parasite of a person, just
yeah.
complete,
Hegelians do be like that.
completely and utterly parasitical on everyone he knew, especially financially. And his own mother once said to him, "I wish you would make some capital instead of writing about it." Just an awful man, especially one to be made of such a messianic figure, because he is
Yep.
essentially tired. Because obviously the things Marx wrote about, other people had written about before him. For example, the idea of you know wage labor, the labor theory of value was made by it was or more prominently pioneered by Adam Smith. Even the idea of surplus value was actually done by a Swiss liberal philosopher called Sismondi from the 1700s. I don't know how you pronounce his name, but essentially all of Marx's main definitive ideas came from other people before him. I suppose he's just someone that sort of put them all into one
Well,
place.
as a Hegelian, he synthesizes.
Yes, and he's sort of this messianic figure because of it. His sort of
Yeah.
absolute focus of of just of this religion that people
It's
subscribe to.
dark magic. It's all dark magic.
So it is kind of weird in that sense. But and then when returning to Christmas Carol a little bit, there are people that like to who are Marxist who like to you know make Christmas Carol one of their own. And it's like, well, that's just so easily debunked by just the fact that there is a character of Fezziwig who is, a good, kind, and charitable capitalist, and he's portrayed as just a purely good figure for the purposes of the story. He's a capitalist. He employs people, but he's just a good person, and just that fact alone is you know is obviously contrary
Right.
to them, where there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. Like there's nothing ethical about any remnants of the capitalist system. So that alone is just
If I can
the
jump off that point, because it's a good point.
sure.
For me, the way I would sort of summarize all this would be to say something like, Marxism thinks capitalism just like makes you bad, basically. Even though they wouldn't use the same that's a moralist kind of a more Christian way of viewing it, but they really do feel like if you're capitalist, you're just like demonic. That's their demon, right? Like that's their Satan.
It's
Um,
excellently unclean. So it doesn't
yeah,
matter
it's
how
unclean, right? So capitalism makes you, for a Marxist, capitalism makes you unclean. I think for like I think for Scrooge, capitalism kind of makes you clean, right? In a way. Whereas I do think that there's something I think something you can whether I think you can draw this out of there. I think Dickens is kind of shooting in a general direction. Like capitalism is just a way of making money. It's not moral, but it doesn't make it immoral. It's just how you structure an economy. But like Fezziwig is a good person, so when he does capitalist things, he does good things with his money. Because the money is like downstream of something else. That's one thing that I really took away from, particularly from this time of rereading the stories. Money isn't inherently bad, but it's downstream of everything else. And if you don't have something upstream of money, then the money becomes your upstream, basically. And you fall into the trap of Scrooge at the beginning of the story, which is where like his only reason for making money is money. Like, well, okay, but why? Well, he just wants to make more. But like that is a pointless existence. That also doesn't mean, I mean, so both Scrooge and like later, particularly later Marxists, fall into the trap of viewing money as like the core purpose, whether it's the acquisition of more of it or the quote unquote even distribution of it. But it's like, yeah, but that's just, it is not a core purpose in life. You have to have something else. And if you make money your core purpose, you're going to go bad. And you can go bad in more than two different ways. You can go bad in all kinds of ways, right? I mean, how many times it's cliche to say, but how many times have you heard stories, and maybe you've experienced or somebody in your life you've seen where they have a windfall, they get money all of a sudden that they didn't, particularly that they didn't earn, and that they had no real understanding of how it was managed or anything like
Oh,
that. And it
yeah.
destroys them because money becomes their purpose as opposed to a tool, right? Money is
No,
just a tool.
terrible, terrible stories. Yeah, of
Yeah.
people in the lottery and they just like spend it on prostitutes
Yeah,
and it's then they just end up doing the same job they were for. It's horrible,
exactly. Yeah.
so horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, because they never had because people were never. I mean, there's other I know other instances of people getting windfalls who then use it. They don't just sit on it, they use it. Parable of the talents, maybe a little bit here. They use it
Oh, that's
to
a great table.
build something else, right? And they use it to employ people and they use it to create value. And yeah, they use some of it on themselves, but they're using it for something that's like bigger than themselves. They're investing it into maybe a community or into a project that helps, like, even if it's a business. Okay, I'm investing it into my business. Do you employ people? Okay, now you're affecting other people, maybe in hopefully in a positive way. You're giving somebody income, right? You're like, what's the problem with this, right? There's nothing wrong with that because yeah, they're using the money, but there was something they're willing to give up the money in an investment in something. Even a business is giving up money to something. I mean, anyone who started a business will tell you that you're dumping money like crazy, capital, speaking of capital, into a project with the hopes of receiving something back. But so it's just about like, so Fezziwig, to bring it back to the story, Fezziwig's receiving something back. He's making profit, but then he's also giving some of that profit away without an expectation of work, without of an expectation of something back.
The
Um, and so, yeah, I
the
agree that Dickens shows you that these are not necessarily contrary models, let's say. They can, and if you're gonna have capitalism, which we're gonna have regardless, I mean, the Marxists can get riggedy wrecked. We're just going to have it. Like it's just what it is.
well, it's
You
very
should do the Fezziwig model because that's the way you can still be virtuous despite having money. It's harder because there's more temptation, but it's not like poverty is completely free of temptation, right? There's a temptation to things like despair, when you're pressed on all sides. And I don't wish that upon anyone, but like there's temptations abound with or without money, right? It's a matter of having a properly ordered view of it. That's what I think Dickens is really hitting through hard with the whole Fezziwig bit. But I'll pass the talking stick back to you. So, but yeah,
joy.
money itself is not the good. It's just a thing.
Well, no, this is the point I'm trying to make. It's that because money is a social phenomenon,
It's a
people think,
social construct.
well, yeah, people think social phenomenon, therefore it can't be, real. It can't be,
Right.
innate to you because it's more people then think it's therefore a malleable concept that you can do away with it because it's not concrete. It's more abstract. Therefore, it's either a contrivance or it's something that can be gotten rid of or can be expended with. And even regardless of how you can just see every culture that has ever existed having some form of currency, some form of
Yeah.
mean change everywhere, you know, because it's, you can still give the idea the benefit of the doubt that it's not really real because it's, a social
My
phenomenon.
my whole response to this kind, not to you, but this kind of argumentation is something like, okay, it's not real. Does it change human behaviors? If it does, then it's real. It's real enough to change, like, you don't work like I was talking to a coworker the other day about this. It was a slow day at work, and I was trying to kind of lay just a little bit of like theory of money, out there, just a little bit. um Doc Brown's theory of money, which is a very much of a kind of a basic take on it. It's not like I'm an economist or anything like that, but it was like, okay, so I held up a dollar bill. I was like, so is this real? And it's like, well, it's real in that this dollar bill is real. It's real in that we all agree that this is a dollar bill. Is it real? Can you find a dollar bill in the wild that's not made by humans? No. But if I say I'm going to give you 1,000 of these, would you be willing to, all of a sudden, oh, 1,000 of those right now, right? So it can change your actions in the world which literally changes the way you spend time, which is right. So it's like this is quite powerful, this thing that's not real. So if it's not real, it sure is powerful for being not real, right? So it's like yeah, not saying you, but the people who throw out this, it's just a social contract. It doesn't matter.
Certainly,
So are families. So are family units are social constructs. It doesn't mean they're not important or real.
yeah,
Like
exactly. Well,
it's
just
like what?
anything, anything abstract, can't be real, or as in it can't have an existence that serves a fundamental concrete purpose, whether that's families or marriage or just like social differences or psychological differences between men and women. That's a very hot topic because psychological differences are more, they're not concrete, you know, they are fundamentally malleable, and therefore the differences that exist have been constructed rather than something that people are innately predisposed to. It's just giving this benefit of the doubt that everything that is not concrete is is malleable, or just is changeable, and therefore someone has constructed it the way it is. And I will say that, just talking about money, as the way money is today, it is easier for people to say money is not real because all the money we use, us today in the world we live in now, is money that is only made valuable because the government says so.
Yeah.
The, the problem comes when you have these insane economists who claim this has always been the case.
Yeah.
This has always been how money is. Money has only ever existed because an officialdom has said so, as opposed to there being innate qualities of the thing that have made it better as money, such as the fact it's durable, indestructible.
Scarcity, doable. Was it scarcity, durable, scarce,
Yeah,
durable, recognizable, transportable, something like that, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Adams has a famous list of things that are good for that.
yeah.
Yeah, they literally just want to deny that, and they just project their own
Well,
man onto the past.
as I
And
pointed out to a nerd coworker at one of my jobs, the Fallout Nuka Cola cap system is literally more stable than our current US dollar in the Fallout world, which is actually true, which is like kind of a depressing idea when you realize that because they can't make Nuka Cola anymore, that it's actually quite rare, and that the caps, right, are actually kind of in a way like, I mean, I guess there's a couple. Isn't there a mission in one of the games where there's a cap forgery or something like that? So you can forge them, I guess, but it would be hard to forge them, right? It would be difficult to forge the caps because the people who make the caps no longer exist. Whereas for us in a fiat system, our own system forges its own money essentially when it wants to. So it's like an approved forgery, uh, right?
prisons. There's in the olden days, as in maybe 50, 60 years ago, cigarettes would be a
Yeah,
currency in
still are,
prison.
still are.
And another one is tinned fish.
Huh?
In Britain, there's tinned tuna, and I think in America, tinned mackerel have been used. But no one told them to do that.
Right.
Nobody told them to do that. They have just made this currency, this thing, as something that, to the best of their abilities in the limited circumstances of prison, a currency for trading of favors and this, that, and the other. Obviously, the supply can sometimes be distorted by whoever distributes the cigarettes. Maybe the officers do, or whoever supplies the food distorts the supply of tinned fish. But nobody told them to do that.
Right.
No, there's no government policy saying that the currency in prisons will be fish. Like they just did that, and you can literally get people writing price lists on some. There'll be
I wonder how Starmer feels about that. The fact that that cigarettes are the currency in prison. I wonder if he's going to ban them, and then the prisoners will just do it anyhow, something like that. Or I wonder.
causes deflation in the current in the currency of cigarettes, then that can only be a good thing, kind of
Right.
thing.
Exactly. Yes.
But yeah, there would literally be price lists written in the rec rooms of prisons, or the communal rooms in prisons, saying this is what's on offer for this, and no one told them to do that, you know.
Yeah.
So there's so this stuff all sort of naturally materializes all the time, and you know, we're very much beholden to people that just for some reason have a lot of power because they have a lot of money, because they can be the ones that are the first recipients of the new printed money,
Yeah.
the Cantillon effect, where the new recipients of the printed money actually benefit a lot, which is, you know, obviously true.
Yeah.
And as long as they are given more power by being the first recipients, then they can propagate the ideology that keeps the system in place.
Yeah.
So some maybe one day we can find a way to break the system. I don't know, but that's the long and
Well,
short. Yeah.
yeah, I think, I mean, if there's a breaking of this, I don't know if it'll be a breaking of the system. I think, I mean, if there's anything we can tie it back into the story to connect it all together, I think it's something of, I mean, Dickens isn't really, I mean, people kind of credit him with like in the reviving Christmas spirit, which is he probably did do in England. I don't doubt
Oh,
that. But
yeah.
he's doing so by drawing on he's just maybe speaking of synthesis a little bit as much as I hate that idea. He's synthesizing the older like he's kind of like a return synthesis, like return to what it is to be Christian, return to what it is to be English Christian, return to what it is to be to like have care for people in your area, which is not just an English virtue,
It's
although I think the English do, at least in ideal, exemplify, at least Dickens really exemplifies something about that. And also like
he's create create
rejecting, I mean, Dickens also rejects Puritanism, right? Quite strongly.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's okay to enjoy things, but enjoy them with other people. Share, which doesn't mean you don't get a benefit, but share in that organic, non-prescribed, non-top-down sense of, hey, I'm having a Christmas party. Would you like to come? Don't worry if you can't bring anything. Where it's at this time, just come on by. I mean, having a feast and inviting people to a feast, particularly people who can't afford to bring anything to the feast, is quite literally out of the words of Jesus Christ. Like it is there in there's so many parables about this in the New Testament of it being invited to feasts. I mean, this is also an image of paradise, of heaven, of restoration, New Jerusalem, all this stuff, right? It's very biblical. And yeah, obviously Fezziwig's Christmas feast is okay, it's not the New Jerusalem, but it it rhymes with that. There's a sense of
And the
inversion, topsy-turviness. The first are becoming the last, but they're kind of choosing to become the last by giving up of their wealth and letting people in and helping people. And there's a joy to it, and it's not like hyper prescribed how it's going to happen. There's a little bit of fun chaos, like a chaotic good happening there a little bit. They are drinking. They're not going crazy, but they're drinking and they're playing a fiddle. Oh, you can't do that. Why not? It's Christmas time. Why can't you do that? Why is that a bad thing? Oh, because then you're not working and making money. That's what Scrooge wants, right? Is everyone just keep working and making money. But there's like Fezziwig understands that that's not the ultimate good. So there's some it's this is just I think that if there's anything that Dickens is telling us, like it's return. All caps with the V is the U. It's like it's just return, right?
either I mean either that or he is creating new custom, because people always think that that history has ended in the 20th century, maybe at a push the 19th, and that everything that happened before that is authentic, and that we can only ever revive things now. But he created
He
something.
created,
He
but hear me
created,
out. Yes,
and
it's a good point, but hear me out. He
obviously,
created something
yeah,
by reviving something.
sure,
And
but
revivals will look different than
there's
what
no
came before.
there's nothing new under the sun. So
Right.
obviously, the past customs themselves will be creations, taking remnants from other things and putting them together in a certain way that's new.
Well, and
So
quite, if
yeah,
I can point out, quite
mm,
literally, that's what Northern European Christmas traditions are. They are, everyone loves to say, both pagans and sort of like crazy evangelicals, that the Christmas tree is a pagan symbol. And as many people pointed out on Twitter, yeah, we love to parade the trophies of conquered faiths. They belong to us now. Look at me, right? I'm the captain now. That's ours. No, 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 it's
it,
not yours anymore because your God failed and our God comes back from the dead. So this is how, look at, it's a Christmas tree for Christ. Yeah, I don't really care. It's ours now. So and that is a very Christian thing too, to be like, haha, it's ours now. Yeah.
there are there are some Christian origins of the Christmas tree as well. Or a friend of
Well, I
mine,
know, but evergreen in the middle, but evergreen
yeah.
had evergreens in
So
general. Yeah.
so either yes, we are rejoicing that we killed their false gods, or they are just literally lying and just being new atheists. You know,
It does in the end. It kind of doesn't matter.
yeah. In the end, it
In
doesn't
the end, it
actually
doesn't matter, right? Like,
gives them anymore.
yeah,
Nobody, as in people don't find the whole, being a stupid rat, being smug in the corner, going, I'm an atheist. No one actually takes pride in that anymore. They used to a lot, maybe about 10 years ago, but they no people are all more very embarrassed to look back on that now. So, that's going away. And there are just some other things in the story I wanted.
yeah. Take it. Go.
Firstly, the I was just reading it and I'm thinking this is so much like an origin story for a villain from whose main story hasn't been made yet. It's like an origin story of a villain that doesn't have that, a prequel to a film that hasn't been made yet. Obviously, that's a modern projection, but I'm just contrasting it with something like Wicked and how, you know,
You
it's
had to bring it up. I
so
keep
I
going.
only say contrast for the point of reference, but it's like it doesn't make sense for the Wicked Witch of the West to be at good actually, and all the people that were, the good guys in the Wizard of Oz are bad actually. Even though both the Wicked Witch of the West and Scrooge are both very cartoonish very cartoonish. I mean, I literally can't help but find Scrooge a comedy character. There's something comedic about it. Maybe that's just the way Martin Jarvis reads, but I can't help it. Is a cartoonish book. And it could have been a
Tim
comic
Curry's
book,
reading of Scrooge is way colder. I
sure.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
colder. It's very heartless. He does a great job of capturing that, like just indifference.
sure. But
Yeah.
yeah, I find it so because obviously it's more simple. It's just such a more simple characterization compared to other characters in Dickens. Obviously, there are many straight up villains in other Dickens novels that are longer. There obviously, but yeah, it's and I'm thinking it makes sense to make Scrooge redeemable because there are obviously some points where he is giving his ideas about life, and he's not making no sense whatsoever. But then you have the Wicked Witch of the West, and you try and make Wicked. And I was watching the film, uh, bootlicking the Wicked film recently, and I was like, it doesn't, it just doesn't make sense for this character to also be the Wicked Witch of the West portrayed by Margaret Hamilton in 1939. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, it's just a bit of projection I have of the obsession with origin stories where the bad character is good actually, and it's interesting to see how Wicked is like the sort of starting point for a lot of these and all these other sympathetic origin stories. And there's also another bit where Scrooge is being shown the Cratchit. There's shown the Cratchits by the Ghost of Christmas Present, and Bob Cratchit is thanking or doing a toast to Scrooge
Hmm.
because who's made all this,
Founder of the feast.
who's made yes, and I find that really interesting because why would he do that? Certainly,
It's a very, it's a
why would
very,
why would he do that if Dickens is trying to make a communist book? Obviously, the
yeah,
workers must, or maybe he's saying like, I don't know, Cratchit's indoctrinated, blah blah blah. But obviously, at the end of the story, Scrooge is more charitable, so obviously it would prove Bob Cratchit.
because,
It would
because
prove
Cratchit,
he
the way,
otherwise consciousness. But yeah,
the way I
um,
interpret that is that Cratchit is, yeah, it's a toast, but he's kind of also praying in a way, right? In a way, you could interpret that as praying for the soul of Scrooge. Like he hopes for Scrooge's redemption.
exactly. And
Yeah.
well, he there when but Scrooge's nephew came to visit him, and Cratchit was in the room, and he was kind of involving himself a bit with, he said Merry Christmas back to Scrooge's nephew.
Yeah.
Uh, so he kind of, I guess he was kind of influenced by the good cheer of Scrooge's. I mean, if Scrooge can have a nephew like that, then you know that Scrooge can't be this completely irredeemable miser if he is able to have a family member like that.
Yeah.
Maybe he's going off that as well. Maybe he wouldn't be so sympathetic. Maybe he wouldn't be so uh, you know, conciliatory to Scrooge if he hadn't interacted with his nephew like that. But yeah, I find that very intriguing. And or maybe
I
it's
like
just
how he kind of guilts his wife into toasting him, but she'll only do it because of the day.
exactly. I mean,
Which is like, no, which is fine because you don't have to like bad people, right? To want them to change. You don't have to like have this feeling of joy, right? It's in order to like as long as you're still because essentially still she if we equate the toast with something of a prayer, which I did, whether that's
sure.
the right interpretation or not, I got that sense of it. She's like, I don't want to because he's so nasty, but because of what Christmas is about, I'm going to anyway. Um,
Well,
I liked that because it's like, I'm going to be charitable to somebody who doesn't deserve it, which is in some ways maybe a supreme act of charity because Scrooge really doesn't deserve it, but she is charitable to him, not even because of him, but because of what Christmas means. And I found that very profound.
no, it is one of the most profound parts of the whole story, and
Yeah.
it's also it is kind of like the idea that okay, it sucks to be in employment sometimes, but push comes to shove, this is the person that is paying your wage, and you may have alternatives certainly, but at this moment in time, this is the person that's paying your wage, and maybe you shouldn't just completely take that for granted, or you shouldn't think that you are the center of the universe just because you're a worker. Maybe sometimes you should just be grateful. Certainly, you're allowed to have a critical outlook about your boss. You should be allowed to do that, and and then people, you say, "Oh, you've got a shitty boss," and that's part of the reason why the workers are oppressed under capitalism. There are so many circumstances in life where you are obliged to spend time with people that are bad or just of bad character or just have some kind of lacking chemistry, character, lacking, what's the right word?
Moral fiber.
The lacking connection with you, some discord
Yeah.
between whether it and it could be work, but it could also be, I don't know, at a local church community or
Yeah.
an in-law or a an extended family member or a member of a friendship group or a society that you're in. There's always instances where you are obliged to have to put up with people that are bad to you. And the idea you might single out having a shitty boss as one of them, which has this highly existential significance, is just silly and childish.
Well, if I can make a point, and then we can start turning towards home just a little bit here.
Of course.
I think, um, sort of to tie in that, in the older sense of noblesse oblige, nobility obliges, it had to do with people of usually of higher social standing should be virtuous in their actions and should be willing to go out of their way to help people who maybe don't have that such high of a standing. Um, I think in some ways Dickens might be kind of he's using that, but I think he's kind of giving a new perspective on it in that there's sort of this noblesse oblige, nobility of obliges, but it's like a noblesse d'esprit, like it's a nobility of spirit obliges, because it's not because even the people who are like the Cratchits are still willing, even maybe begrudgingly, to toast Scrooge because they have a nobility of spirit, even if they're not part of the actual nobility. There's something about they're doing something noble in their wishing of good cheer, even upon those who call Christmas a humbug. Like because they're willing to they can set aside their own selfish frustrations to understand that the true if Christmas is real, and it is, then and if Christmas really means something and it means what it does mean, which it does, then the Christmas is actually in some ways perhaps mostly for people like Scrooge that they need it the most because they've severed their own connections to their fellow man and to anything bigger than what they can get in their bank account. So that is a kind of a nobility of spirit obliges, and I think that runs through. It's like whether I think like for Dickens, whether or not you have the money, okay, maybe that dictates how you should be charitable. But there's something of a charity of spirit that can be found at different levels of social strata, and that is not a Marxist idea at all. That is not that
No,
acknowledges the reality of social class, and it acknowledges that some people will have more than others, but it says, but we can still have this no, but it also in some ways extends nobility metaphorically, a nobility of spirit throughout all stratum of like strata of human existence, at least in England at his time. I think that it's definitely not Marxist. That's very Christian. Um,
no. Yeah,
yeah,
there's such simple ways that you render this thing not Marxist. Just very simple things that will destroy the whole thesis
yeah.
because of that sort of thing.
So
But yeah,
yeah, so if we, I guess to wrap it up, it's that well, Marxism often is evil. It is of the devil. We reject it. And anyone who claims that Dickens is a Marxist or that this story in particular is a Marxist should be you should toast them at Christmas and say may they come to truly understand what Christmas is about, because Christmas, particularly this story, is not about some sort of weird uh, you know, strange equality things, right? It has nothing to do with that. Charity has nothing to do with striving towards equality. Charity has to do with giving up your best to something that is better than you, really, in the end. And giving of your time and energies to people who need it is better than you keeping it. Doesn't mean you're not allowed to have any of it. Doesn't mean you can't enjoy it, but you should be having that mindset of how can I use what I have to do something good. I would say. Fred, any final thoughts as we try to turn home here? Because I know otherwise we'll go keep going on forever.
um, yeah, it's difficult for me to summarize it. I mean, I think it's a very powerful story. It's obviously a simpler one compared to Dickens' usual, and I admire it very much for how it has been so influential and so just very pioneering of a lot of things. And I also people have mistaken the simplicity for the ability. Well, the simplicity is often then an easy route for people to project bad things onto it, like communism or whatever. And even though that's so easily debunked, but yes, it's you should always keep it as more of a simple story than it really is, rather than having these wider implications about class and you know class struggle and all that bollocks. And it should just be a means for Christmas to be uh, irrationally positive, even though you should have that way about all of life. But well, that's it's the in terms of a Christian worldview of the idea that life itself has some irrationally positive thing about it, and obviously that comes with the birth of Christ, which is what Christmas is about. So it is excessively about the idea of some irrational affirmation of life. And if Christmas Carol can help to brighten other people's Christmases with that message, then yes, that's what it should be about. Also, remember to watch the Martin or listen to the Martin Jarvis reading on Spotify. It's on Spotify as as an album rather than an audiobook, and it's probably on YouTube. If not, listen to the Tim Curry one, which I might try out myself.
Good.
I'll try it myself and see if my family like it because we usually listen to the Martin Jarvis one. But and there is I can't remember which of the films that was made of it that was really good. The one in I think 1984 was that filmed in a town called Shrewsbury, a city called Shrewsbury in England, which is a lovely city. And there's still a grave in a graveyard where with Ebenezer Scrooge written on it
That's
because
cool.
there's
A
a
prop. Yeah.
you can I went and saw it a couple of months ago, and there's I think there's another film which is really good. I can't remember, but
There's the 1951 black and
yeah,
white.
51 one, yes.
Yeah.
I can't remember which one is best. Wasn't that one have the Alec? Wasn't there one with Alec Guinness? Was he the 84 one? No.
I can't remember.
Was it Alec Guinness? No. But
We'll look
ignore.
it up.
Yeah, the Martin Jarvis one is my favorite thing, and I recommend that to everyone.
These are a few of your favorite things. And with that, we wish everyone a great rest of your Adventtide. This will probably drop the week before Christmas. So right at the end of Advent, the fourth week of Advent is the most hopeful week of Advent. And then Yeah, so everyone have a Merry Christmas. I know I've wished people that on the previous episode. If you haven't checked that out yet, by the time this drops, you'll still have some time before the end of Christmas to do so. Me and Bulge, who's been on the show multiple times before, look at basically an Anglican and a Catholic look at Nightmare Before Christmas through a lens of conversion and enchantment, and it's which is also a great film. So if you're interested, check that out. Fred, do you want to shill anything before we say goodbye? Aside from
Uh,
Jarvis's reading of Christmas Carol, which you've done several times.
Follow me on Twitter, and I'm actually writing some stuff, so I might start writing again.
And your Twitter handle appears to be stable.
It has been labeled well as it currently stands. My uh, Twitter handle is Mischief Anglo.
I'll I'll pin it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where you just need to be.
You're an Anglo full of mischief, and that's what we appreciate about you. Cool. Well, yeah, and so Fred, I think the next time you'll be on the show will be in the new year, so at some point in time. So you also have a very Merry Christmas and have a very Happy New Year, and we'll see you do something fun, and we'll see you in the new year. We'll have
Thank
to
you.
think of something else to do that'll be interesting and fun. So I have some ideas. All right. Everyone, have a great rest of your day, week, whenever this weekend, whenever this drops, and yeah, we'll see you in the new year. Peace.